Welcome to the Self-Service Generation podcast, where we explore how technology impacts, improves, and enables the customer experience that we all expect from businesses and organizations that we engage or work with. Don't worry, we only keep it to 20 minutes, so hopefully you'll find it interesting. Thanks very much.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Self-Service Generation podcast. You're joined by me, Gavin, and Steve.
Hello, how you doing? You all right?
Yes, I am fine.
Good. How did you do after our run that day, like when we went out last?
I was fine. I think, luckily, there's no pain. I found getting out of bed a bit of a challenge. Not necessarily the tiredness of the body, but it's more specifically the legs or lack thereof.
Lack of use of legs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you did all right. You came round and you were helping me out doing a bit of a rehab thing. And look, it was your idea as well. So, don't start blaming me about anything.
No, I did volunteer myself for the torture. So I guess it's my own fault. But to be honest with you, I did enjoy coming out. Burrator is beautiful as a place to go for a run in the morning. Great bit of fresh air, and actually, obviously better for it. And obviously, I had to double that on by going to five-a-side a couple of days later as well. So I really doubled up on my exercise.
That's right. And then didn't do anything for 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, I hadn't done anything for a couple of weeks before that, so it's sort of like it's like a monthly thing.
Training regime isn't what we'll call consistent.
Captain Consistent is not a name commonly used with me.
We're all good. No medical issues at this moment in time. Everybody will be happy to hear, so that's good.
It's definitely a positive to start the podcast.
It is, yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about ChatGPT. I think obviously there's a plethora of podcasts out there who have been covering and looking at this topic. It's something that we've wanted to look at for a while, but naturally kind of had quite a lot of other things we wanted to specifically cover first. And we've given ourselves the opportunity to be like, we really want to talk about this. We really want to cover kind of some of the core topics, but also give some context, which I feel a lot of kind of podcasts have a tendency to skip over in regards to what it is and how it works and how it can benefit people. So I think that's kind of the plan for this podcast, is trying to make sure we've only got 20 minutes, so make sure it's kind of as consistent, concise, and useful as possible.
Well, that impossible task for me and you, mate. But we will try. I mean, look, there is a point. The point is that trying to understand how it works. Everybody gets what it does, but also if you're trying to understand how it might then be used, it's good to understand the context of how it works, what the different layers are, and what the power of it is. We all know about the content generation. That's been quite popular, but it's particularly good at summarizing, categorizing content that it's indexed. I mean, the ChatGPT project is it's really still a research project in a lot of regard, except the models are getting better. And we got 4 came out a month ago or so. So they're improving those things. And it's only about really understanding different context and, tuning the feedback that they've had since what they launched it into. Was it November 22? Yeah. I mean, Jesus, that's
less than
nothing.
6 months in.
We're less than 6 months, and, the extraordinary visibility that this has had is, it's astronomical. But it's because people are, I think, probably afeared of it, wondering what it can do to change things, and it will change things. But necessarily, it doesn't have to be a fear model we work on. It could be a very positive model for our society. It's just that we need to understand what it does and what we can use it for sensibly.
I think there's a big opportunity here, isn't it? I think so much of the time, a lot of this technology can be hidden away in the background and used by large organizations, and they're kind of, they don't necessarily see the light of day, or they're not necessarily given access to people, like people at the front. I think we also have to be really aware, as well as we're in the tech sector, or people in the media as well. Like people feel that this is out in the open and available, and yes, it is publicly available, and we are experimenting with it. But there's also that element of the fact that a lot of people still don't know about it. A lot of people still don't. It's the same with cryptocurrency. If you're in the industry and you see it, you're more aware of it. But there's still an awful lot of people who don't know what it is, don't really have a concept of kind of what the power is or the capability of it is. And with that, it's going to become an element of the more people, the more it starts to raise its awareness in the market, the more challenge and more concerns that's going to raise as to what this thing is and how it's going to impact everyday lives.
Yeah, look, it's a revolution in its own right. There's a lot of what I think the big furore has been is that what it does is it does what we do quite well, which is we do very good summarization from our own general knowledge bases. So one of the big things about the AI subjects, this is such a AI is a bandied around term, but we have general intelligence, and usually the AIs that we deal with, artificial intelligence kind of models, are a lot more specific. So, you could have a robot that can build a car, but it can only do certain things on that car. It's very specifically programmed to do those things, and that's generally what the AIs have been up to now. They are very good at doing a particular job. They do it very quickly. They automate it well, and off they go.
Yeah, one of those big things, and where I really came from, where it's really had its basis, is in that data analysis. Is it been in data analysis? So looking at data and understanding the data and being able to create create level output using that data as a basis, or create a level of understanding using that data.
Yeah, that's right, and that's what it's doing very well. And and people have noticed that it isn't perfect all the time, and it doesn't do everything particularly accurate first time, because it's still learning, and it's only got its own database of information. The models that we're looking at the moment, the data that it's trained on at the moment is up to 21, I think. It's still getting stuff from after that, but the main work was done on that, indexing whatever content they get its hands on up to 2021. So after that, it's a bit more vague, and it's not so much, it's got all the information. But that's then the challenge. You have to give it a model to learn on, and then it starts having more intelligence about a subject, and that's part of how it can be used. We're working on kind of content fine tuning with it so that it'll do the right task for a particular thing. Big investment just before Christmas when it came out was Allen and Overy, so big lawyers, to start producing kind of briefs and stuff, and start actually helping solicitors to build their cases. That's a huge thing, and a lot of investment in it as well. Drafting kind of merger and acquisition stuff and things like that. So from the information it can get. Now, with the big caveat, you'll need a solicitor to look at it and make sure it's okay, but it's going to do a lot of that heavy lifting, and that's the bit. So, as a species, is it going to make us more productive in an area, putting stuff together, or is it going to, take jobs away? I don't, automation is going to change what happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to risk everybody's, livelihood. We need to consider it. I mean, look, Alibaba are doing their own one as well. That's literally been talked about this last couple of days. They're all doing them.
I think that's the thing. I think, and that's ultimately the way that we have to look at it as a whole. I did a piece on Twitter yesterday around the direct comparisons between the development of the AI revolution versus the industrial revolution, and looking at kind of those key parallels. And it's kind of interesting to go, well, when we started bringing machinery into factories, there was a big uproar in regards to people were worrying about losing their jobs, or from a labour point of view. And with automation and AI, it's exactly the same element. It's an element of automation. So people are still worried about the job aspect as well. So there's definitely parallels there we can draw. I think the main thing is ultimately we have to look at it as an element of, it's about kind of, there's a progress thing there, but this is something that's being developed. We have to be conscious and aware of what the impact it is going to have.
Yeah.
And I think there's some big conversations in the moment around regulation, around kind of what the laws are around this piece as well.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that happened in industry as well, in regards to when machines were started, when industrial revolution was happening, there were sort of guidelines and rules and things that were brought in place to be like, look, this is brilliant things happening, but we have to be able to manage how this is happening and make sure it's better, kind of it was for the better of humanity. And it's always going to be driven by ethics.
Yeah, well, you'd hope so. Oh, look, there's a big furore at the moment about from some of the big tech leaders and stuff like that about slowing it down. You know, Elon Musk has had his word in and all that type of stuff. You know, pausing development on these things. That's not happening. You know, the Pandora's box has been opened. That's never going to happen. You know, I saw a TED talk not so long ago, and we were just saying, look, we're opening these things up. It can do stuff very speedily, and it's going to continue doing that, and it's only going to exponentially get bigger. You know, you're not going to close that box. It's not happening. You know, there's no way of us closing that box. If we do, you know, say the Western world decided that's what we're going to do. You know, we've got Italy now blocking ChatGPT. They're the first Western country to do that, whilst they look at the legislation you talked about. But if we do it, then the Chinese aren't doing it. You know, we've got Baidu doing it. You've got Alibaba just doing it. You know, there's all sorts of different organizations working on their own models of exactly the same technology. So there's no way we all stop, because there'll always be somebody somewhere that will do it and carry on with it. You know,
my concern with I don't know, billionaires and company leaders coming in and saying, "Oh, we need to stop development of this," is the reason behind them wanting to stop the development of this. Like, would it still be the case if it wasn't open, if the as you call it, Pandora's box wasn't open to the public and everyone suddenly had access to this? Obviously, all these things were happening in the background, happening while even his own companies were working on these elements in the background. Is a fear more that actually it starts level to some extent, and we've got to be really careful with this. To some extent, levels the playing field in regards to what people have access to and what people are able to build, starting using these technologies. Again, we have to be aware of the fact that we're talking about this leveling of the playing field. Ultimately, the people who have access and have an understanding of these platforms and how to use them are a subset of society. There is a danger there to create, and as with any kind of revolution in history, who kind of suddenly starts kind of, I don't know, becoming kind of leaders or becoming kind of, there's an inequality basis that gets created by people who have access to these tools. Whether we were looking at, I mean, stone spears, for example, the advantage of that kind of came about all the way through to this technology. You're at danger there of having this kind of disparity there, and this is something we're going to have to be conscious of.
It's interesting that you say that, and I'm not sure, for the simple reason that if we think about the technology that we've got at the moment, say phones, so smartphones, not everybody has access to smartphones. Not everybody can use their smartphone. They might use it for very specific things, but not the depth that that piece of technology can do work for them, or, you know, enable them to do stuff. You know, there's a loads of layers into a smartphone that people don't use, and there's, you know, they do loads of stuff, and there's people that don't. But everybody pretty much uses language, and I think this is the bit that's made it very inclusive. So we work with a disability charity in London, Inclusion London, and the technology that we're working with them on is to actually help their audience be included in that. And it's a language-based solution, because language is the common thing that we have, whether you're able to talk or whether you're able to type or whatever. Language is always the bit that's the bit that sets us apart from other species in the world. We'll be able to communicate incredibly well, and this is helping people communicate, or it can do. You know, one of the big use cases is to to automate conversation where people can get answers from simple questions. That's what they're doing at the moment. That's, people are asking it questions and it's going to get stuff for them. But they may not have the facility to, or the tools to go and find that research themselves or get simple answers to questions that they want. Maybe it's more inclusive in some regard.
Yeah.
From that side of it, that use case, if you like.
Yes, the power is as a technology, it will enable us to create a more inclusive environment. The challenge is, how do we get more people on the peripheries of technology or of these industries aware of it, understanding the capabilities of it, so we can then have a more inclusive society in regards to have more people have access. Because ultimately, with ChatGPT, it's a really good, it's a really easy to use, easy way of first jump getting into AI as a mechanism for doing amazing things. It was just about finding out how we can kind of distribute that and get that in more people's hands, to be able to see, actually, to empower people to be able to, empower people first to start getting their feet wet.
Well, if we're taking our self-service conversation that we've been talking about, on this here, if you can use just natural language to talk to a business, a service, if you're trying to manage your healthcare, and you can just talk to something that, an endpoint, it might be on the phone. It doesn't have to be through a smart device, an app or anything like that. But if you could talk to that and get answers that you need without having to wait, to go through a painful process and stuff like that, then that's going to help you as an individual and improve your quality of life. Because, beyond that, we know how difficult it is to engage with a health service, maybe, or something like that. Look, we all struggle trying to get appointments, trying to get things that should be a straightforward process or a good service. Imagine that, if you can just literally speak to an application that goes, I understand exactly what you're trying to say. You just talk to me in a normal fashion, and I've now gone and got that information back for you, or I've set up your appointment, or I've given you some advice. Again, this is the controversial bit. It's gone and given you advice based on the knowledge that the business or the organization or the people have said. That's the bit that, if we trust the advice, then that then becomes that opener to everybody being able to use it and trust the response. I think that's the bit that's maybe the missing link at this moment in time. What the investment's really going into is trusting what's coming back out.
And again, this is part of the challenge, and probably bringing it back around to the kind of the case in Italy as well, is the only way these models can become smarter is by putting more data into it. And if we're looking at potentially even moving to a point where we're looking at diagnosis, which ultimately I know that IBM have done some work on that, the ability to be able to put in, and again, hold up on this, but medical records in, looking at symptoms, looking at all those different elements of field, and look at having a historical element of data. You are in a position to some extent to be able to allow, and the biggest issue is always going to be how someone talks about their symptoms, or whether they're aware that they're symptoms. And sometimes you're going to need to have that conversation with a doctor in order to do that. But to some extent, there is an element of triaging that potentially you could do using this technology, which would then lighten the load on other areas. I think we're way off that. I also think there's an element of trust that has to be in place, and there's a lot of risk you have to manage whenever you're looking at doing anything like that. But ultimately, these models we have to be putting the data in there and be utilizing that in order to make the model smart enough to be able to do any of these things.
Yeah, I think you're right. Look, I think that they become a collaborative learning tool in a lot of regards. You're asking questions in a natural language, it comes back and you go, okay, that's pretty good. And it's given me some stuff, I'm not sure about that. And it allows you to fine tune what you're asking, or it's, but that's part of how, let's face it, our now digital native generation that are coming through that have never known anything different. this is now another generation of people that will be talking to this kind of thing and go, well, I understand that that's probably not 100%, so I'm going to check that bit. But generally, that sounds sensible to me.
Yeah. And that is the challenge we're at the moment, isn't it? Is the fact that a lot of people who are using these platforms are taking what they're giving them as being gospel.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's where the danger lies. There's also a whole, and again, we're conscious of time, but there's a whole element around copyright. So obviously, all these platforms are generating content based off content that has been scraped from the web, which to some extent has its own copyright access to it. So therefore, who owns? There's a whole discussion now of who owns that content. So there's loads of topics of conversation around specifically from a ChatGPT.
Well, that's why there's lots of podcasts about them.
Yeah,
exactly. That's why it is. But I don't know. I'm not sure we're resolved on this as far as this is concerned. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to make something that's a useful tool for a business. Certainly, look, Microsoft have now got a framework that's OpenAI that you can just go straight into. That's not, the other version. So we've got an early access to that stuff, and they want it to be used for a good use case. They want it to do the heavy lifting of some stuff that's hard to do. This is very hard to do, is get context, understand what somebody's asking you, summarize that, generate content based on the context and the question that's been asked. Those are the really hard bits, and they've started to nail that. Now the big challenge is getting the right data back so that content generation is accurate and knowledgeable and the right thing that you can trust. I think the trust base on that is probably the bit that there's now the only missing link, really. And how do we do that? And there are models to now start fine-tuning that and make it a trustworthy model. So there is the bit.
And I think that's a really good point to kind of finish on from the podcast from this point of view as well. I think ultimately we can deep dive into loads of different aspects. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground in regards to the podcast today, but there's so many different areas which we could deep dive and discuss even more. But I think the whole conversation is going. It is about trust. That's why we're seeing this challenge from Italy at the moment in regards to why they shut down access to ChatGPT. That's why we're seeing a little bit of an uproar at the moment. So I think if we can get however we get that piece right, I don't really know what that looks like, but it is about kind of making sure that we create a model and create an infrastructure and create a plan for how some guidelines as to how this can be used, what the limits are, and how it's going to be used, and making sure that everyone has access to it to some extent to allow them to play with.
Well, and then the access, like you said, I think the access is important, but because it's language based, I think the access is easier than it is for a lot of other technologies. So I think this is one of the few technologies that's really given access to anybody and everybody, because it's language and it's what we do commonly as a species. So I think that's really good. And if you can train it to do a specific job, and you can try it and it understands the context of what you're asking, and you've got your finite knowledge base that it's pulling back from, then actually the trust is going to increase dramatically, because it's your bit of data. That data is accurate, rather than it going on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
and then asking it loads of questions, and it becomes very right wing, very quickly, if you're not careful.
As we've seen from other bots that have been launched online, exactly. From other large organisations. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Steve. I think
that's right.
I think it's worth us. What we'll do at the end of this is when we launch a podcast, we'll put a question out there just asking for general thoughts, as we always do. So if you want to, it'd be really interesting to hear what the audience's thoughts are on ChatGPT as a whole. Kind of maybe look at what your hopes and fears, but any kind of thoughts on the things that we talked about today, feel free to kind of find the podcast. If you look at the Spotify, or find us on Spotify, add a comment into the podcast where the question is. We're really interested to hear what your thoughts are, and make sure you subscribe for future podcasts and future discussions.
Yeah, that's great.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time, Steve.
All right, and you. See you later.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Self-Service Generation podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Look out for more in the series where we take deep dives around specific challenges in this space. Until next time.